we just finished a beautiful retreat, which reading some people's letters was very transformative for them and calming. And for me, my mind was not calm, but I really appreciate the silence and the opportunity to watch and learn. And the teachings were helpful and got me thinking, and I realized I was needing to shore up some things. So I turned to Lama Tsongkhapa, and I had used before his definition of patience or fortitude to help me, but I wasn't getting too much mileage out of it, so I went back to it and tried to understand it a little bit better. So I wanted to share some things he says, and a reflection that I've been finding helpful. It's kind of on the logical side, but for my mind it worked. So he talks about patience having these three aspects of disregarding the harm that's done to you. And so to myself, I usually say disregarding what I'm perceiving as harm, and then accepting the suffering in your mind stream, and then being certain about the teachings and maintaining firm belief in them. And then what I hadn't really noticed before is then he gives the factors that are incompatible with that, which was quite helpful, because I was kind of like, you know, when you're struggling on all three fronts, it's like, okay, now what? Couldn't quite do it. And so, and it was interesting, it was helpful, you know, when your mind is in a certain state and you're ready to learn, then, and you have this retreat time, then you have the opportunity to help use these teachings to help your mind take the medicine. And so, as he said, the first one, this thing of accepting the suffering, disregarding the harm, what is getting in the way of that? It's your own hostility. So you can't really, it's kind of like you can't put it down because your mind is angry and hostile. And then the second one, accepting the suffering that's arising within your mind. He said that as well, that your hostility is stopping you, but also a lack of courage. So that really gave me time to pause and reflect on like, what was I experiencing that I was, you know, not able to do that at that time. And then the third, being certain about the teachings and maintaining, firmly maintaining belief in them. That to me is like the red flag that comes up in my mind if I'm having some kind of doubt that I'm usually not recognizing. And then he actually spends this whole chapter in the Great Treatise unpacking exactly this. The whole chapter is in response to this. And luckily, for my mind at that time, he started with all the benefits of working on anger, and those are very inspiring. And, you know, especially if you're in that state of mind, and it just helped me to become much more realistic. I realized from these words that he quoted from Shantideva, where he says, undisciplined persons are as limitless as space. You could never overcome them. And you know, when you're in that state of mind, you're really kind of focused outward a lot of times. Maybe you're have anger toward yourself, but a lot of times, you know, you could be focused outwards. And that's kind of a loser kind of proposition. So then he says, if you could just conquer this one thing, it'd be conquering all these perceived enemies. I put it in my own words. So he says, I can't change the external things, but I can change the state of my mind. So then I don't need to change anything else. And so that just gives me room to breathe and help me to redirect myself. And then there were many other benefits. One that really spoke to me was that I hadn't ever kind of put together, but in my own words, I'll say, when I have anger, the mind easily goes to what I would call the whatever mind. Whatever. That's like, I'm checking out now. You don't matter. You know, that's where the mind goes. And that's really against my values, my own values. So at that moment, I realized I'm not living up to what I want to live up to. And so he says, persons who have patience or fortitude will not have many enemies later on, and they will not have many separations from those with whom they are close, which was very nice. I want to have close connections. They will have much happiness and contentment, no regret at the time of death. And then this thing about the whatever mind, he says, patience or fortitude is the best approach for dealing with the inclination to disregard others' welfare. So it helped me to really recognize that I'm not tuning in well enough to what's going on for the other person. I'm just caught up in my own little world there. So, And then he goes through other benefits, which are very nice. But then he gets to the first part where really he's asking us to look at something which for me I hadn't really thought of in this way. In fact, I can remember sitting in this room and debating this point about how much control we have. Sometimes when we express things, I'm unwilling to say I'm powerless because it would make me feel powerless, and then I wouldn't do anything. But I have to say his logic here is quite useful. He says, on analysis, this is the outline, on whether the object has self-control, anger is unjustified. So what he's asking us to do is look at the situation, the person, whatever, and then ask yourself, what would be reasonable grounds for having anger towards someone who's a harm doer, someone who's doing me harm, even if I'm just perceiving it? What would be the grounds for having anger? And then he comes back, well, of course, you're first thinking that they wanted to harm me and they prepared this method and they were preventing my unhappiness or inflicting harm. So, of course, my anger is justified, right? That's how it feels, like they're doing this. And then he says, okay, are you angry because they inflicted harm on you when they had the self-control not to harm you? Or are you angry because they were utterly without any self-control? So now he's put you in this bind, right? I was like, no way out of this. Because I was like, no, I don't agree with this thing of control. But he actually convinced me. Because then he really makes the strong case, and he makes it well. So I'll read his words. Okay, in the former case, where you think they have control, right? They're just doing this all on purpose. Your anger is unjustified because those who inflict harm do not have control over themselves. For when the conditions and causes, the seeds left by afflictions to which they were previously habituated, okay, so first your seeds, and then a nearby object, and then erroneous conceptions come together, they give rise to the thought to harm, even though the harm doers aren't thinking, I'm going to feel malice here. Whereas if those causes and conditions were not complete, they would not produce the thought to harm. And then he goes on to say, even if the harm doer thought, and I did this, I made myself the harm doer when I looked at this too, trying to figure out, is this really how this works or not? And then he said, think about it, even if the harm doer thinks, like imagine you wake up in the morning like, I want to do some harm today. That won't even make it happen. It won't make it happen. You can say, I want to be angry, and rah, 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 you can just say, I want to do this, and it won't work. You can see how ridiculous that is. All these things come together, and it just really struck to me how powerful our habits are. And for me, I really was turning this on myself. I need to look at my habits, and I don't feel powerless when I have this kind of understanding, but I do have a better recognition for the power of the afflictions and the habits of the afflictions and the whole situation. Seeing it in a much bigger picture is quite helpful, because anything that can get your mind to be more broad when you're narrowed down in such a small perspective, I always find helpful. So I share this because it was going against some thoughts I had previously, helping me to see things in a broader way, and I couldn't refute it. So. Thank you. This particular part it's in volume 2. It's on page 160 and 161, but the earlier stuff was on page 151. It's the chapter on the perfection of patience.